Welcome to this session. This is a session on learning about what it's like to get a PhD. Pi Sigma Alpha, the Political Science Honor Society, is organizing this, and a group of us are very happy to meet with you today. Our format is to take a few minutes and talk about some basic things that we think you might be interested in, and then as soon as we're done with each of us taking a few minutes, we will be available for us as well as additional people who are in the audience and would like to have one-on-one or small group conversations to answer additional questions that you have. So we hope that there are enough of us that we'll be able to meet in small groups and try to answer all the questions that you have. But why don't we get started by suggesting a couple of things to think about. First of all, my name is Gary Briner. I'll introduce other people as they come up. We are all in the political science department. And in order to sort of introduce this topic, I thought I would maybe make 3 points. First of all, when people think about a PhD, I think it's usually attractive to people who really like to write, who, when they have a term paper assignment, they're excited about that because it's an opportunity for them to figure something out rather than, a burden that they are trying to get through. So if you're thinking about how much you enjoy writing, how much you enjoy being in class and discussing issues, how much you like to read, how much you like to do research projects when you can. Those are pretty good indicators that you might be interested in a PhD because that's what we do. Really the big difference between what we do and what you do is that we get paid and you have to pay. But so if you like to do it and you still are paying to do it, then you might even like it more if you get paid to do it. The second thing is the typical plan for a person who wants to get a PhD would be once he or she's graduated from college, you could go directly into a PhD program. You could work for a couple of years. Lots of people argue that it's great to have some experience, and our panelists will talk about their own sort of personal career paths, and you can see those different approaches. But there's no need to have a master's degree. A lot of people who start, I think maybe most people who start a PhD have completed their bachelor's degree, and then they've decided they want to do a PhD. Some people do a master's degree thinking that they're not sure whether they want to go on, and a master's degree can be a sort of a terminal degree where you can get a master's degree and then decide that you'll go out and work or something like that. But you don't have to have a master's degree in order to get a PhD. If you have a bachelor's degree, you typically enter a program. If you do well, you'll get a master's degree as part of your PhD, and then you'll continue on with your PhD. And so that's where it works. I think people typically take maybe 6 years to complete their PhD. It can take a little longer. Some people get through a little early. And it typically involves 2 or 3 years of courses that you take and then preparation for a dissertation. The dissertation is really sort of the heart of the PhD in my perspective because it gives you a chance to do an independent research project. And so as you do a couple of years of coursework and begin to think about what you want to do for your topic, then you prepare your dissertation proposal. You have a committee that you're working with in order to get some ideas. And then once that is approved, then you work on a project. It may take several years of field work where you're collecting data. It can be a library project where you're looking at archives, all kinds of approaches that you can do depending on what's going on. The good thing about PhDs is there has traditionally been pretty good funding for research. And so there are all kinds of opportunities for you to, once you get to the research, the dissertation writing stage, the research stage, to be able to apply for fellowships and grants and other opportunities that will allow you to be able to finance this. The third thing I wanted to just briefly talk about is the job market, and others will have some ideas about that. As you know, the recession is pretty tough in lots of areas, and higher education will be no different. Lots of universities, public universities in particular, have budget cuts that they are dealing with. And so either schools in Utah, the University of Utah, Utah State, and with the exception of Utah Valley University, they have like an unlimited budget apparently. And so they don't have constraints. But everybody else is worried about the way in which budget cuts will constrain certainly new hiring. At BYU, for example, there's a hiring freeze. So no new faculty members are being hired. So this is not a great time. Actually, this is a great time to go get a PhD because 6 years from now, the economy is going to be doing a lot better. And so why face a grim job market now when you could be having fun in graduate school and then by the time the economy rebounds, you'll be ready for a job. We have some information. The University of Oklahoma does a survey of salaries, and our recollection is the latest survey we saw there is that the starting salary for assistant professors, which is the beginning rank, is about from $55,000 to $75,000 a year, and then salaries would probably over the course of a career double. The typical career path is for someone to start as an assistant professor, which means you're hired with your dissertation completed or about to be completed. You work for 6 or 7 years, and you go through then a tenure review process. It's called continuing status at BYU, but the same sort of thing. And that's where the university really decides whether it wants to invest a lot of money in keeping you throughout your career. If you pass that tenure review successfully, then you have tenure, which means you really have opportunities to continue to do what you want, to continue to your research, and as long as things go well, you have a position that you can assume for as long as you want. So the nice thing about, we'll talk a lot about the advantages and disadvantages of a PhD, but it does provide really secure career path and opportunity once you get through that initial hurdle that demonstrates that you have the abilities to be a successful teacher and researcher and be engaged in the life of the community. So we'll be talking about these issues in more detail. I think maybe we'll just go in the order that you're sitting unless somebody needs to go first. Is that right? And you're welcome to come up here or use the microphone, but Kirk Hawkins is the person closest to me. Mike Finley next, Matt Holland, and then Jay Goodliff. They can introduce themselves a little more, talk a little bit more about how they got to the position that they are now.
Well, again, for those who don't know me, I'm Kirk Hawkins, and I've been chosen to sort of represent the subfield of comparative politics. And you're probably at least vaguely familiar with that because maybe you had to take an intro class, like 150. But I have to tell you quickly, for those who didn't take any classes with me and you still don't really get these subfields, comparative politics studies the domestic politics of other countries, sometimes referring to the United States. So we're not like international relations. We don't look at the relations between countries nearly as much. Diplomacy, warfare, trade, and all that. We look at the insides of the countries mostly. And so what I tell my students is most of you, frankly, should be studying comparative politics because it's going to be much more useful for you than all that IR stuff. But the IR guy's next, and he can refute that if he likes. My particular emphasis, and most comparativists would have a regional emphasis to go along with whatever else they know, and I emphasize Latin America. But I also have subject specialties in things like political organizations, especially political parties, political economy. Right now, for example, I'm teaching a capstone seminar on the causes of corruption. And then my baby, the one I've been working on a lot, is studying populism. You can think of it as studying the nature and consequences of rhetoric and worldviews on politicians and voters' behavior. So that's a little broadly what I study and represent here. I've been asked to tell you a little about my career path, how I got to this. And let me say very quickly, to start that out, that I am not one of those who got into academia because my father was a professor or at least a white-collar worker or anything like that. My dad's a carpenter, and he never finished college. And so getting into academia was a real sort of a tough journey for me. I had to learn a lot along the way. I think it is a little easier. I've worked with students who come from a more academic background, and they're more familiar with the ins and outs. They've got a little bit of a head start, and some of you in here probably fall in that category. But the others here, maybe who don't fall into that category, you're doing the right thing, which is you're here at a meeting trying to find out about this. And that's a lot better than I did. I just kind of had to learn by trial and error. But you can do it. Let me tell you very quickly how I got here. I was a BYU undergraduate. I started out in mechanical engineering because I had some aptitude for science and math, but decided after a while I really didn't like it. I got tired of people talking about their calculators in class and thought this is not the place for me. And so I did a very nice study abroad program that took me back to where I'd served my mission in Chile, and came out of it thinking I want to be a Latin American expert. And So I got into international relations here at BYU. I enjoyed that experience a lot. At that time, though, it was a lot easier major, which meant that I graduated with no job skills whatsoever. And so not knowing what to do yet, and a little scared of the job market, I decided to try graduate school, which, as has already been suggested, is a great thing to do when jobs are a little uncertain. And I did a quick master's here at BYU, a program that isn't here anymore in international relations. That helped prepare me and give me more focus. And then when I was done with it, I knew I wanted to go on in political science. And that would be my way of sort of studying the world. And by that time, my mind was also being open to the idea that I didn't just have to be a Latin America expert. I could learn about human behavior more generally. And that was very interesting to me. So I went on and did a PhD at Duke University in North Carolina, and they represented they had some nice things for me. There were some connections to Latin America. They had some good coursework and professors there. They had a good, strong political science program, especially in comparative politics, and some nice sister institutions in the area that I was able to have conversations with while I was out there. I had a good experience, a great experience doing that. And unlike many of my colleagues, I left school a little soon because I was a single guy and had found my wife. And she was already going to be teaching here at BYU. She had a PhD in communications or journalism. And so I came out here and actually finished writing up my dissertation while teaching part-time here at BYU. And that's not an easy thing to do. It's unusual, and I didn't realize how unusual it was at the time. I'm lucky I survived. But I did. I finally finished and even managed to get a job here in this department, which was a wonderful thing, and I've enjoyed my time here since then. I've been here about 7 or 8 years, depending on how you count my part-time teaching. Now, let me give you some other just general observations. We've been asked to hit a couple of subject areas. I'll talk a little bit about this family life stuff. A little bit about alternative careers, as in what happens if you get a PhD in comparative politics and you decide you don't want to be an academic. Maybe a little something about the challenges of a dissertation within comparative politics, because it is a little different than in the other subfields. Regarding family, the others here are going to say what it's like to have a real family when you're going through grad school and afterwards. I was a single, so instead I'm going to talk about what it's like to be single and going through graduate school. And the answer is, it's just fine. I don't think I had a worse time. I don't think I was cut off from opportunities to date and have a meaningful social life and activity in the church by being single and in graduate school than if I had gotten a job. In fact, one of the advantages for a single, which some of you in here are, is that the areas where they have universities with PhD programs also often have a large cohort of members of the church, enough to sustain things like singles wards and good institute programs. And so that gives you a really nice environment that you can plug into. And I took full advantage of that when I was out in North Carolina. Some parts of the country are a little better that way than others, right? Washington, D.C. is a great area if that's what you're looking for. And I suppose if you're in some parts of Texas trying to do a PhD, that might be a little tough. Just right thinking about where members of the church often move and live, especially those with professional emphasis or who are also going on to graduate school like you are. And to encourage you a bit, singles wards outside of Utah are wonderful. And it wasn't a strange affair at all. It was a great, welcoming environment for me. And it was a safe, important place that I could go to for several years until I did meet my wife. Again, I'll let others tell you what it's like to be married and working in academia, because, of course, you have to think about right after the PhD and what it's like to be a professor with a family. As far as alternative careers, I'll tell you what I tell most of the students who ask me about this, which is that a PhD in political science can be used for other things, especially in something like comparative politics. One of the keys is that you have developed, inevitably, some specialization in some area. And that's a valuable thing, because, I mean, you're a real specialist by the time you're done in Latin America and, say, political economy. And so if you decide not to become a professor, that can be really valuable. And that's perhaps more true than it might be for some other subfields. I won't say which ones because they'll just feel bad. But there's a lot of ability to transfer those intellectual assets elsewhere. So whereas, ironically, the Foreign Service might be less interested in you because you become too much of a specialist for them. I mean, they'll still take you, but they're going to want you to learn, a half dozen other languages and learn a half dozen other regions before you're done with your career with them. There are other places in government that now really would like to have you, say, the State Department, because you're now a regional specialist and you can do things for them that a person with a bachelor's can't do yet. Likewise, lots of private industry will be interested in you, things like political risk analysis firms, because of your area-specific knowledge. And again, you probably have some subject area knowledge that's very unique and can become a real an asset in the job force. And of course, in academia, I have to say, usually there's a pretty high demand for good comparativists because, right, you always have a couple of these area niches you'd like to fill in a department, and you just can't because you can't find anybody who does this. Whereas people doing U.S. politics, they're a dime a dozen. And we see this here at BYU. Most of our students emphasize U.S. politics. The best ones will always do well. Well, I'm not going to say what that implies about my abilities. Presumably they hired me maybe without being the best, because they were desperate, right? They needed a comparativist who would do Latin America. But that can be a real asset for you as well. So in academia as well, you might find that demand for you is just a little bit higher than it would be for some of the other subfields. Let me just conclude by mentioning one other thing that's tricky about comparative politics is the need for field work. We all do research, but for many of us in international relations or U.S. politics, and even the theorists who do this work studying a lot of textual analysis, they'll do. That's work they can do at home, and so when they take leave, it's mostly because they want to, change of pace, a different environment, to go somewhere else and get some new ideas for a little while. But otherwise, they get their data right there. They don't have to leave and go somewhere else. In comparative politics, you usually have to go somewhere else, and that means time. A dissertation takes longer, probably a year longer. It means extra money. You're going to have to come up with plane fare and cover your living expenses while you're working abroad. And that continues when you become a faculty member because you're going to want to do research and take some students with you. And when you apply for the funding and it's 3 times the amount of what your Americanist colleague is asking to work with the same number of students, they're going to look at you funny and say, I don't know that we can give you that much. And so that's it's a constraint you'll have to confront and deal with if you go on in comparative politics. The benefit, of course, is you get to travel a bit more, and you and your family may be living in a few different foreign countries more often in your life than you would if you do, say, U.S. politics. And I will leave it at that.
My name is Mike Finley, representing the IR subfield, which is apparently the inferior subfield, I guess, to comparative politics, I just found out. Yeah. But as an aspiring comparativist in the department, if I could just get into that club somehow, I don't know. But the international relations subfield is typically divided into 2 broader categories, one side focusing on security and conflict issues, the other side focusing more on political economy. Even within the conflict, the subfield, if we want to call it that, there are a number of people who do sort of historical, not just historical, but traditional security studies type work, looking at grand strategies of foreign policy and comparative foreign policy and so forth. Looking, most of this using sort of qualitative research, case studies. Then there's another subset here that primarily does quantitative work, things on the causes of war, the conflict management, and so forth. International relations has transformed somewhat to have a lot of modeling, sort of game theoretic modeling, and mathematical modeling generally. So some of these things are catching on in recent years, but within the security section, I think the 2 big divisions here, or I shouldn't call them divisions, the 2 big components, I guess, are the traditional security studies and the quantitative people. International political economy are going to study a variety of different topics, right, from trade, globalization, money, banking, business, currencies, and so forth. These are sort of the traditional things that have been studied. IR has also gone on to take in other areas such as human rights and terrorism and so on and so forth. So the IR subfield captures a lot, but I want to emphasize that in contrast to sort of the sharp divisions between subfields, in some ways, international relations is a subfield that is drawing heavily on comparative politics, and even within international relations, the people doing security work or the conflict work are also doing political economy in many cases, and vice versa. And so We organize these subfields for various reasons, but in terms of what you'd go on to do in a graduate program, there's often, a lot of overlap that you can exploit as you do your work. And so in my particular area of study, I look at civil wars, which if you look at sort of traditional definitions of subfields, civil wars is kind of a comparative politics topic. A war, between a rebel group and a government's kind of, the domestic politics within that country. But international relations scholars have been the primary people studying this topic, and perhaps they're not doing a very good job at it, but they're the ones that have been doing it. And perhaps some of the very best work in the most recent years in the Civil War literature has actually tried to apply international relations theories along with theories of comparative politics and build bridges across these subfields. And so the international relations subfield is perhaps historically was much better defined, or there were these clear sort of categorizations that we could make. I think that's changing, and these subfields are bleeding together a little bit more. This is unrelated, but so I don't forget, I just wanted to mention one night within the international conflict, scholars of international conflict, there are various groups that are very supportive of graduate students and young assistant professors. One in particular I just wanted to mention is that there's an organization called Women in Conflict Studies that provides support for women that go into studying conflict topics. Potentially one criticism of international relations is that it's been defined over the years by male scholars, and not as many women have gotten involved, and that's changed a lot recently. And one neat thing is to see that this organization has sprung up and has been very, very successful, and they hold meetings several times a year, and along with the major conferences, the American Political Science Association and the Peace Science Society. They also have their meetings there to support women who are graduate students or young assistant professors. Let me say a little bit about my own career path. I got interested in what I study. So just to reiterate, I studied civil wars and ethnic violence. I actually got interested in this on my serving in a mission in Russia. I served most of my mission in an area of Russia called Bashkortostan, which is about 30% Bashkir and only about 36% Russian. And it was during the first Chechen War that I was there, and although I was quite far from from Chechnya, I talked to lots and lots of people, especially mothers who had sent their kids to Chechnya, and were very upset about it, and they really lamented the fact that they had to be involved in this war and that their family had to be taken into it. And while going about my missionary work, it really just bothered me for the whole time I was there. Why did the Bashkir people live in peace with Russia and get along so well, and they had for centuries, and yet the Chechens couldn't seem to get along very well at all? And so this was kind of sowed the seeds, I guess, of my interest in studying conflict and war. To understand why was this the case in various countries. I came back. I did not attend BYU as an undergraduate. I was at Utah State, but I got into political science there and began to study these topics, and I've continued to study them since. I'm not sure I'm the typical case where I got interested in this quite a while ago and then went to school for it and then went on to a graduate program, but nonetheless, that's what I did. When I did get into school after my mission, I think it was kind of the in thing to be we always said we wanted to study conflict and we wanted to, but we all wanted to be policy people because academics were those people that sat around and debated definitions of things and stuff like that. And that was my perception, I think, as an undergrad is that, it wouldn't be all that exciting to become an academic and that I ought to be going into, the policy world so I can try to make a change or make an impact. But I think I slowly realized that one thing, at least for me, I just wasn't as content with this because I looked at what the policy community was doing in a lot of our foreign policy decisions and even domestic policy decisions in these other states, and I thought, a lot of these policy decisions are being made based on partisan leanings as opposed to trying to figure out Why are things occurring? Why is war occurring? Why is it ending? And it seems like that's where academics and science in general could make a real contribution, or at least I was convinced myself of that as an undergraduate, and hopefully there's some truth to it. So that got me interested in thinking about, well, maybe I ought to be an academic and go on and get a PhD so that I could explore some of these issues of why things occur. So I did a master's. I wasn't completely sold that I wanted to do a PhD, so I did a master's. And like Kirk, it sounded like I was a little bit undecided till I did the master's and wrote a thesis, and really ended up enjoying the research. Went on at that point to graduate school at the University of Illinois, and was there for, I guess I was there for 5 years, and then started here at BYU a couple of years ago. And ultimate career path, my ultimate hope is that I can land a job at UVU. If I just knew someone there. Oh, I do. I'll have to see if I can work the connections. No, I'm really happy to be here at BYU. I love my graduate school experience, and I heard all sorts of horror stories about graduate school, and it wasn't there for me. I loved graduate school, every bit of it. I was married when I went to graduate school. We had one child at the time when we started. We had 3 by the time we ended. And it was a great time for our family, actually. Both of our families are from Utah. We were able to sort of get out, live on our own, grow close to each other. Certainly there were hard times, like there would be with anything, but there were a lot of great times and easy times as well. I think I had more time in graduate school than I did as an undergraduate. I don't know, just working so many jobs, I think, and as an undergraduate, and then get into graduate school. And one thing to note is that usually when you go to graduate school, most graduate schools will give you financial support that won't completely take care of your needs, but will go a long ways. They'll take care of your tuition, and at most places you'll get between the lowest I've heard in recent years is about $15,000 a year stipend to be a teaching assistant or a research assistant usually, and up to, I just heard of one recently, it was about $24,000 a year, but this was for Manhattan, so we'd have to adjust that. Although the $15,000 one was San Diego, so 35 at Stanford. Wow. So there you go. And research support, right? So it's doable to go to graduate school, and even with a family, and make ends meet. My wife taught piano while we were in graduate school. That's helped us to meet our bills for the most part, and we picked up anything else in student loans, and we're able to get out with reasonably low amounts of debt. And so I think it is doable to go on to graduate school, whether single or married, and there's lots of support all the way around. Let me think. I should wrap up, but let me see if there's. Let me say one thing that maybe perhaps unique to my perspective is that I only applied to schools in the Midwest for various reasons, and most of the schools I applied to are ranked anywhere from 15 to 35, something like that, depending. We won't get into all the ranking systems, but roughly in that area. And I do want to remark on this a little bit. I think that it's important that, if you're going to go on to graduate school, you try very hard to aim as high as possible. It certainly leaves more doors open the higher a grad school you can get into. But it doesn't, if you don't get into Harvard or Princeton or Yale, it's not, it shouldn't, kill your chances of going on and becoming a professor and having a very successful career. And so, in my case, when I went out on the market, I was very fortunate and ended up with something like 11 or 12 offers to fly out and interview. I didn't go to all of these, but I had at least those offers. So I was able to still have success, but none of these places were sort of, these weren't Ivy League places, right? So by going to a school that was ranked in 20, 25, something like that, I still had lots of doors open, but it was all sort of at Big Ten level or lower and not maybe higher. And so if you had interest in going, to very high or having a career at one of these top universities, it is important to aim very high. But you shouldn't. That shouldn't dictate everything that you do. If you messed up your grades when you're a freshman or something, that doesn't count you out by any means. There's ways to get into very good programs and to have very good opportunities across the board. So. And I'll just say one other thing, and then I'll wrap up. As far as jobs outside of academia, there are jobs outside of academia, but again, it's going to be more limited than a lot of disciplines and a lot of areas, and one subfield, I guess. No, there are opportunities. I have a very close friend of mine who really wanted to get into the NGO community. And his sense was, and I think he's right, he's looked at a lot of various NGOs, and at least at the bigger NGOs where you could sustain yourself for a while, they are requiring PhDs to be able to be at the higher levels of these NGOs now. And so this particular friend of mine wanted to get into Amnesty, and it was tough to get in and crack the organization, but he was able to get in and for a couple of years work at lower levels. But they required, up until he actually had PhD in hand, he couldn't get into any of the senior positions there. And so PhDs do open a few doors like this. One other example, I guess, is another guy I knew really, he had worked in a philanthropic organization, not sure if I pronounced that right, and in order to get to the highest levels of this organization, he also had to have a PhD, because a lot of what they did was granted aid to developing regions or communities or things like that, and they wanted people that had actually gone through and learned about this and best ways to do it, and so they required the PhD. So there's some places where maybe they require the PhD, some places where getting a PhD will give you lots of tools, and you can go on outside of academia. So I'll wrap up there.
I'm Matt Holland. I went into political philosophy because I saw it as a growth industry. That proved not to be the case. So I went through college with a Perry Mason complex. I was sure I was headed for the courtroom. I was going to be an attorney. But then by my senior year, I'd talked to enough lawyers and kind of got a sense for what they really did, and I didn't want to do that. But that left me very uncertain about what I did want to do. I had an opportunity to take a fellowship to Israel, to the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, for a year's study of leadership in Western democracy with a focus on human rights and international issues, and that was a great experience. But I still hadn't sort of found myself academically, and had an opportunity to work in management consulting. And I did that. I did it over the counsel that I had been given, that if I really wanted a PhD, I should get into it. There are kind of two schools of thought here, and more of my mentors said, if you're going to do it, you really ought to get into it right away, because it's a long haul and it's expensive, and there's a real, I think, logic to that. But for me, it was great to have gone out and worked for a while first, and I do think it gives you a different perspective and enhances the way that you see the world and have a feel for how things work outside of the academic lens. So I'm in favor of people taking some time if they need to make sure this is something they really want to do, and also to see if you've got the fire in the belly for a PhD. And that's really what finally hit me, as I was working in this field of consulting and having a pretty good experience and learning a lot and meeting people that were more interesting than I thought they would be. Each night I was coming home, and I should have been reading Business Week and the Wall Street Journal, and I was picking up the ideological origins of the American Revolution. And suddenly dawned on me, I could do this for a living. And so I felt the world of ideas reach back out for me, and I felt the world of teaching reach back out for me. And I just decided that that's what I wanted to do, that I would be happier doing that than this other very lucrative career. And so I went back to get a PhD in political philosophy at Duke University. I was roommates with Professor Hawkins. I'm grateful that he didn't take opportunity here to share a story that involves me taking one too many muscle relaxants. Okay. So, of course, part of the reason he didn't tell is because he knew I could stand up here and tell a story about how to get him out of a jam once I had to pose as his attorney. That's true, actually. We'll tell both those another time. So. As an undergrad, I'd done a lot of my classes in American politics. I was a TA for Gary Briner and worked with David Magleby on the exit poll. And I was sort of an American politics junkie. But towards the end of my undergraduate career, I got more interested in political philosophy. These are the normative issues of politics, not what is happening in politics, but what should be happening in politics from an ethical or normative or values perspective. And so that was sort of a late-breaking interest for me. And I got to Duke, and I still remember showing up there the first day and someone in the hallway said, "Oh, Matt Holland, you're the other Americanist." I didn't know I had been so pegged. I was still trying to sort my way through that. Political philosophy has a number of different subfields. Ancient political thought, Plato and Aristotle and those dudes. Modern political thought, sort of Machiavelli forward, contemporary liberalism, and then a smattering of other fields, one of which is the one that I found and really just energized me, and that's American political thought. And this was a wonderful way for me to combine my interest in American politics, but also deal with normative, philosophical, ethical issues that I thought were important. And so it's probably a subfield of a subfield, and sometimes that makes it harder to forge a path in a career. But for me, the only reason to go get a PhD and take a vow of poverty is to go study what you love. You've got to wake up in the morning. You just can't wait to tear into this stuff. If you don't have that, you shouldn't be going to get a PhD. But I found that's what I had, and so I went to get it, and it was, I think, the best decision I made, professionally speaking. And so I had a great experience at Duke. In terms of programs that any of you who are interested in this subfield, I think of the sort of big name schools, the best places right now are Harvard and Princeton. A few years ago, I would have included Chicago. I think it's not as good a place as it once was, although it's still a very good program. There are some other schools that have excellent reputations. I think Duke is one of them. It's typically ranked as in the sort of top 5 or top 6 programs in political theory, in part because it has a real commitment to these different subfields. They've got figures in ancient, modern, contemporary liberalism, American political thought, much more so than even other places like Princeton and Harvard that tend to be more focused on modern political thought and contemporary liberalism. So Duke is very good. Georgetown has hired some very good people. Notre Dame has hired some very good people. So these are other schools that you might consider if you're looking. And I appreciated Mike Finley's comments about you should shoot very high, and it does maximize your opportunity, but those aren't the only places that you can go. Although, again, I think there's if it's tough to get jobs in higher ed in general, it's especially hard in political theory, so you should be realistic about that. In terms of alternative jobs, for political theorists, cab driving, or university president, either one. So, yeah. Actually, a number of my friends who've gone off into political theory, but have not sort of stayed on a tenure track program, have gone into university administration or academic leadership in some position. They also they go to think tanks or become journalists. A lot of the big name, you think about someone like George Will, he has a PhD in political philosophy. A lot of the folks who write for the New Republic or National Review or the Weekly Standard are people who have masters or PhDs in political theory-related fields because they're dealing with these highly charged normative ethical issues, and they bring some real reflection and erudition to the debate because of their training in the Western tradition and in good, hard ethical thinking in general. So that's, I think, an exciting field. It's hard to break into, especially at the top, but that is a fairly common training background in training for those who do that kind of thing. So anyway, I'll stop there and turn over to Jay.
My name is Jay Goodluff. I represent the American politics subfield. American politics studies domestic politics. It's not American foreign policy. But let me just say that, and so most of you probably already know about American politics. Some people study the presidency, Congress. Some people study it institutionally. Some of them study the behavior of voters and politicians and such. The way that I really see American politics, it's the most scientific approach to politics. And so it's a way of thinking, really, and that it's probably the highly developed subfields in political science, and so all the other subfields are borrowing their ideas and applying them. So if you want to see where the most developed political science takes place, my career path is a little different. I was an engineering undergraduate. I went to MIT, and then I went to graduate school in political science. I think what I most wanted to be was an academic. When I was an engineering undergraduate, I worked in some research labs, and what I really liked were what my professors were doing. I liked how they were able to choose what they wanted to do as research, and then get to teach what they were doing as research to other people. And I didn't really think that was possible in politics. In political science, I thought that you had to be a politician until my political science professors pointed out to me what they were doing. And I turned my hobby into my career because I'd always been a current events junkie. And I just started studying it and found I really liked it. And so I applied to graduate schools, both in engineering and political science, tried out political science, and it was great fun. I have a great job. I get to choose every day what I'm going to do research on, what I'm going to look more carefully into, to try to figure out what's going on in politics. And then I get to take some of the knowledge that I have acquired, I get to try to share it with my peers through publications and research, and then I get to share it also with students and convey some of the knowledge that I've acquired over time to them so they can learn the same things and be able to take those tools and apply them to subject matter that they might not be exactly the same as mine, but is in a different area, or take the tools that I can teach them of research and apply them in other areas. So I think I have a great job. It probably is not the most financially rewarding job compared to other jobs that I could take. But the reason that I took this job, the reason that I've been interested in academics since I've been an undergraduate, was because of the quality of life, the fact that you can choose what you're going to work on, the fact that you get to share that work with other people, that you get to set, to a large degree, your own agenda of work. So if you're somebody that likes to be directed on a daily basis, what you should be doing for your job, and taking those kinds of directions from others, academics is not going to be a good job for you. If, on the other hand, you're someone that likes to decide every day and every month and every year and 5 years and 10 years what kind of research program you're going to engage in, and you're willing to do that on your own, you have the initiative, and you're willing to explore and are curious about the world, and sharing that curiosity with others, then academics is a great job to have. And that's why I like my job. I think it's one of the best jobs to have in the world. Now, that's my career path. I am actually similar to Kirk. I went to graduate school single. And so I got married and took my job at BYU at the same time. I went to the University of Rochester as a graduate student, and I met my wife there in a singles branch. So that turned out very well for me. So I don't have any problems with singles branches either. I think they're great. Now, there are other opportunities. I am someone I've chosen to work to acquire more methodological skills. That's partly because of my engineering background, and I am someone that's interested in carrying around the calculator and seeing what's going on. Applying those kinds of tools to politics and outside of politics. And frankly, as a result of that training, I have a lot of other opportunities. I've been approached by former colleagues and such to work on internet startups, both as, say, a full-time position or in consulting positions. Some of my colleagues now work in market research firms, making, I'm sure, double what I make right now. And I've been approached to work in those kinds of jobs as well. I have former colleagues that work in academic administrative jobs, besides President Holland, who And they really like it. And another area that people with my kind of training have gone into are working for government, such as things like the Congressional Research Service. My particular area of expertise is money and politics, and so I work with people in the Federal Election Commission. We trying to talk about data and such. And the two people that I talk to the most in that office both have PhDs in political science. And so in some ways we're colleagues working in the same area trying to figure out how money affects politics and trying to record that and share that with other people. So there are many opportunities available outside of academics with a PhD in political science, especially with a PhD with methodological training. I think that the more methodological training that you can get, the more opportunities that you'll have later. The thing that I would like to talk about very briefly is how you prepare yourself as an undergraduate to get into graduate school. There are several things that will be helpful, such as good grades, doing well on tests, such as the GRE is what they're going to ask you to take to go into graduate school, so it's good to prepare for those types of things. But one of the things that you could really prepare yourself for, and to even see if graduate school and political and, say, academic life is good for you, is to work as a teaching assistant or work as a research assistant for professors here on campus. You'll get an insight into the teaching process as a teaching assistant, and you'll get insight into the research process as a research assistant. You can see the development of research questions, how the limitations of theory and data will make you actually have to change the research question or change the types of hypotheses that you're going to test, and yet still allow you to find out something new and interesting about the world. And also to see what it's like to go through peer review, to find out what it's like when people tell you that your writing isn't so great, or that your data are insufficient, and how you're going to handle that kind of criticism, and instead of seeing it as a setback, see it as an opportunity to make your research or your teaching even better than it was before. If going through that process will allow you to see how much you will like the process of being an academic. And the other thing that, besides giving you the experience, is having that interaction, that mentoring experience with faculty. They're going to be able to write you wonderful letters to get you into graduate school. And those are some of the ways that we're actually, BYU, excellent at placing undergraduate students in the top graduate programs and the PhD programs. And so get to know your professors and get them to and be a good worker for them, to show initiative and to show hard work for them, and then they will write you excellent letters so that you'll have a better chance of getting into graduate school. Thanks.
On behalf of all my colleagues on the panel and those in the audience, I really want to thank you for coming. As you can tell, we really love our work. We love working with each other. We love working with students like you, and we like to talk about it. And so this is a great opportunity for us. If you have any particular questions that you'd like to ask the group as a whole, we could do that for just a minute. We're anxious to have one-on-one conversations with you, and we have at least 3 other colleagues in the back, so there are plenty of people to talk to. But does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask to everybody? Let us do that for a minute.
I'd like to know a little bit about some of the benefits and maybe frustrations of the publication process as it relates to career development and academia.
Whoever has the microphone there, Matt, you have the microphone, so switching the.
Well, it is increasingly a publish-or-perish world for universities that are on the make, and so it's a good question. You have to really kind of make a decision about where you want to be. If you want to be at a solid, either state or private institution that's kind of a full-bodied university, there are most likely going to be very significant publishing demands, and that takes a lot of time, especially up front, because you're just coming out of a graduate program and you've just written a dissertation, and you'll think it's brilliant, but it won't be. And you'll have a lot of work to do to either turn that into some articles or a book, a lot more work than you probably plan on. And you're teaching new classes, and so you're prepping things. So it's not for the faint of heart. It suggests also you should marry well so that you have a supportive spouse. But again, for those of us that do it, it just underscores 2 things. Make sure you pick something you just want to live with 24 hours a day, because that's what you'll almost need to do. And if you can do it, the payoff is so great. If you and for those of us that have gone through the process and gotten CFS or tenure, it does start to turn. You feel a bit more like the wind is at your back, and you've got a good network of scholars, and there are more opportunities that come along, and you start talking to people that generate ideas, and you have a better feel for how to submit things and respond to things. And so there's a steep learning curve even after graduate school. So it's a very long gestation period of training to go through graduate school and those first few years of being a junior scholar. But again, if you can make it work, I think you see that almost universally we love it. It's worth the effort. So.
We don't have too much time. There could be something else in here in 10 minutes or so.
So maybe we should look for other questions. Sure, maybe one more question, and then we'll just head back to the food, but all of us will be there ready to answer questions. But sure, one more question.
My question was more for, I forgot what your name was.
Jacob.
Okay, Jacob. How difficult was it to make the transition from doing an undergraduate and a graduate program in different disciplines?
It was a little different for me. I actually, I don't think it wasn't perhaps as difficult for me as other transitions might be. I was a minor in political science, so I had some of the training already. I had to rely a lot on my professors to know what to do to get into, to say, graduate school in political science. I didn't even know where to apply. I did what they told me to do, really. Apply to these schools and then go check it out. So that's what I did. It turns out that the type of political science that I was interested in wasn't that big a change from engineering, in as much as I have a much more quantitative approach, more things like game theory, which were being more and more developed in political science. That was not a big surprise to me. And so it helped for me to have the methodological training and to move over. So perhaps you could ask also, how hard would it be go to, say, from management consulting to political philosophy? I think it's not always a bad thing for you to finish up your degree in one area and move somewhere else. My brother-in-law got his major in economics and then switched to medical school. Did some pre-med classes, and that's essentially what I had done. I had done some classes in political science, but hadn't majored in it.
Could the four of you just stand up and in 3 seconds introduce yourselves so people will see who else they might want to talk to, starting with Dan and then.
I'm Dan Nielsen. I study international relations and comparative politics, focus on international development.
I'm Darren Hawkins, but I'm leaving, actually.
Okay.
I'm an appointment with the dean. I'm one of these sort of administrator types more than, but I teach too these days. So, but thank you all for coming, and thanks to all of our panelists for helping out.
Eric and Sven, would you?
I'm Eric Kleiner. I teach international politics with a special emphasis on Chinese politics. Sven Wilson. I'm here to talk about the master's program.
In 5 minutes, yeah.
Oh, you actually want the microphone?
Yeah. We're going to break this meeting.
We're
going to break this meeting, and then there's a second meeting on master's programs.
Okay.
But I kind of wanted to ask what kind of PhD you get if you want to be a university president.
We've already discussed it.
Too late.
We're here because we want to talk to you, so please talk to us, okay?